Yes, hello once again and welcome back to Classic Dirt Bike TV as we take a look at another long lost vintage racer from back in the day, and in this next video it's another Italian machine from 1978. Now this quite nice looking Italian made Aspes 125 is yet another bike from the very comprehensive Terry Pickering vintage dirt bike collection. Now Terry normally builds and restores these kind of machines himself, or he gets his friend Keith Ree to help out and bring some of these old racers back to life, although this particular machine is a bike that Terry actually bought from another bike collector called Dave Drabble. Now as far as I know, this bike is almost 100% original from back in 1978, although I think naturally these two tyres on the front and rear of the bike have been renewed since then. Now it's said that the Aspes Motorcycle Company was originally established in 1955 in Gallarate near Milan in Italy, where they initially started by building bicycles, as of course many of the other smaller Italian motorcycle manufacturers did in the late 1950s and 60s. Now in 1961 the Aspes then progressed to making mopeds that were powered by an Italian Minarelli engine, and that was followed in 1964 by their 50cc sports motorcycle, but their first ever real sports off-road bike came in 1967, and that was called the Cross T. Now then, in 1970, they saw the introduction of their Myco-powered Apache 125, and this was the very same time that Aspes then started to name their motorbikes after American Indian tribes, and of course future models would then be called the Hopi, the Navajo, the Cheyenne, and of course the Sioux. Although it was in 1971 that Aspes unveiled their first ever homegrown engine, which was this lovely looking 125 two-stroke, which was designed by Vito Consiglio, and this featured motor would end up powering Aspes road bikes, road racers, motocross and even go-karts for the next 10 years, and would be the mainstay of many of their future motorcycles. Now the motor of course was a single cylinder two-stroke with a 6-speed gearbox and your standard wet multi-plate clutch, and by all accounts this was quite a good little motor, and it took Aspes to an overall championship win in Italy in the 125 class in 1977. So with credentials such as those, it must have been pretty quick for the late 1970s. Now as you can see, the engine was housed in the steel tubular frame, which was quite light and very strong, but one of the innovations on this particular 125cc motor was that Aspes insulated the engine from vibration by mounting it on these rubber blocks at the front and rear of the motor. So I can only imagine that it would have been quite a smooth ride when this 125 was buzzing along and flying around the racetrack. Now the clutch cable and its pivot lever were mounted on the bottom of the engine, which was quite a strange place to fit it, where it could be of course easily damaged and pick up all sorts of mud and moisture. So I can only imagine that changing this cable would have been done quite frequently between routine servicing. But it was quite unconventional of Aspes to fit the cable here, because most other manufacturers fitted their clutch cables on top of the engine. Now again, this little 125 had an Italian made 34mm Dell'Orto carburetor to supply it with its fuel. And as of course with many of these Italian motocrossers from the 1970s, they tended to use locally sourced parts on their bikes, and our particular Aspes has a pair of Corticosau forks on the front end. Now, as you're aware, these were not the best of suspension systems for the period, although they were quite good enough for these lighter little 125s, but anything bigger or heavier than maybe a 250, then these Corticosaus tended to be much too soft to be of any serious use. Although they were decent enough for these smaller 125s. And again, at the rear of the bike, we still have the machine's original Corticosau gas shocks with their remote reservoirs, but it's quite unusual to still see these fitted onto one of these old vintage Aspes 125s, as many riders tended to ditch these in favour of much better quality shocks like maybe Öhlins or something similar, although placing the gas reservoir outside the bike certainly helped to cool the gas and prevent fading when the shocks were worked very hard. Now again, the bike's rear swing arm was of course made of steel, and this was just quite a simple box type construction, as you can see here, but this rear sprocket, brake hub and that quite substantial looking chain guide and combined brake anchor are definitely the genuine articles from 1978. Now, as I remember, these Aspes 125s had a fiberglass fuel tank in 1978, and I'm sure that the front and rear mudguards were also made of that same material, and I'm certainly no doubt here that this is the genuine article from that year. And of course it's decked out in those nice graphics denoting that they were Italian champions way back in 1977. Now, a quite comfortable looking seat on our particular 125, and again this is the original part from 1978, but these deep and lush looking seats always seem to be a big feature on many of these Italian made motocrossers, so the Italians must have liked their comfort, even although these were still motorcycles that were built for racing off-road. Now, the bike's exhaust expansion chamber is the original part from 78, and it still looks in very good condition for something that's now coming up to 43 years old, although it does have a couple of little dings and dents, so it may have seen some action on the track during that time. Now, the pipe of course leads onto this Proma Moto Aresi tailpipe, which again is another locally sourced product, and it looks very close to those gas canisters on the Corticosau rear shocks. Now, once again, a good pair of Preston Petty plastic mudguards, and back in the 1970s these Preston Petty products were the kings of plastic, and they supplied a multitude of different motocross manufacturers with their products, and at the time these items were said to be unbreakable, but they were certainly rugged and strong and could be made of course in a multitude of different colours. Although I suspect that these particular front and rear mudguards will be pattern parts and remanufactured items and not the originals from 1978. Now, the bike's controls once again all look authentic for the period, and the fixed crossbar on the handlebars is certainly from that era, and the Magura levers and grips are certainly original. Now, the fork yokes or triple clamps were of course made from alloy, and the bike also has a pair of alloy clamps that are used to secure the bars. Now, in this next shot you may see a little piece of mud on the ball end of that Magura lever, and this was of course when the bike got blown over in the wind and dug itself into the grass while I was trying to take these pictures. But once again, another fantastically rare Italian bike, and just one of the lovely machines that motorcycle factories around Italy were producing on a regular basis up until the massive Japanese invasion of motocrossers into Europe in the early 1970s, of course, when smaller companies like Aspes just couldn't compete on price or quantity. Although back in the day, these Aspes 125 CRCs were still a very quick machine while they were competing in their native Italy and around Central Europe, although these machines were virtually unknown here in the UK or in the USA. But other Italian motorbike factories, including TGM, Ancelotti, Aprilia and even Motovilla, just to name a few, were all producing some very good motocross race bikes, and we'll be taking a look at more examples of these Italian stallions in another video coming soon to my Classic Dirt Bike TV channel. But even just being able to have a look at these rare machines is certainly a treat for the eyes, and my philosophy has always been that if a bike looks right, then it usually goes right, and of course this little Aspes definitely ticks all the boxes in both those respects. And once again, Terry is a very lucky man to include this particular vintage specimen alongside his many other dirt bike classics. So I do hope you enjoyed taking a look at that lovely Italian Aspes 125, and if you like these kind of old racers, then please consider subscribing or retune to Classic Dirt Bike TV.